You are the CEO. It's just after sunrise, and you're walking into the office, knowing something your employees don't. Your company has enough money to survive about 30 more days. 30 days before the bank account runs dry. 30 days before payroll becomes impossible. 30 days before hundreds of brilliant engineers have to be told it's over. Outside, Silicon Valley is booming. New startups are appearing every week. Investors are chasing the next big thing. But inside your office, the mood is different. Every conversation feels quieter. Every smile feels forced. Every meeting begins with the same question. How much time do we have left? Your biggest competitors have more money, more customers, more influence. One has already captured the gaming market. Another is preparing for the future. And your biggest product has failed. Not because it was slow, not because it was ugly, but because you bet on the wrong future. Now, there's only one option left. Cancel years of work, risk every dollar the company has left, and build one final chip. No backup plan, no second chance. If it fails, NVIDIA becomes another forgotten Silicon Valley startup. If it succeeds, it won't just save the company. It will help reshape gaming, scientific research, artificial intelligence, and eventually, the entire world. This is the story of how one of history's most valuable companies came within 30 days of disappearing forever. Today, that same company is worth trillions of dollars. Its technology powers artificial intelligence, supercomputers, medical research, autonomous vehicles, robotics, and some of the fastest computers ever built. Its chips have become so valuable that governments compete to secure them. Its CEO, once worried about making payroll, today, world leaders, billionaires, and the biggest technology companies on Earth wait for his next announcement. But history has a funny way of hiding the difficult parts. People remember the success. They rarely remember how unbelievably close it came to never happening at all. To understand how NVIDIA escaped extinction, we have to go back, long before artificial intelligence, long before trillion-dollar valuations, to a diner where 3 engineers made a decision that almost destroyed them. Long before he became one of the most recognizable leaders in technology, Jensen Huang was simply an engineer. Born in Taiwan in 1963, he spent part of his childhood moving between countries, adapting to unfamiliar places, and learning that survival often meant solving problems instead of complaining about them. After studying electrical engineering and working in Silicon Valley, he became fascinated by one question. Computers were becoming more powerful every year, so why were graphics still being treated like an afterthought? Most people saw graphics chips as accessories. Jensen saw something bigger. He believed one day computers would need dedicated processors capable of handling workloads that ordinary CPUs never could. It was an idea far ahead of its time, and like many ideas ahead of their time, almost nobody believed it. 1993. A Denny's restaurant in Silicon Valley. 3 engineers, 1 booth, countless cups of coffee. Jensen Huang, Chris Malachowski, Curtis Priam. There were no investors sitting beside them, no television cameras, no billion-dollar valuation, just one conviction. The future of computing would depend on graphics. Over breakfast, they sketched ideas, talked through impossible engineering problems, and decided to build a company dedicated to one thing: creating graphics processors, more powerful, more efficient, and more ambitious than anything that existed. They named it NVIDIA. It sounded bold, it sounded exciting. What they didn't know was that the company they had just imagined would soon be fighting for its life. The office never really slept. At 2 a.m, the lights were still on. Coffee cups covered every desk. Whiteboards filled with equations, chip layouts, and deadlines that had already passed. For nearly 2 years, Every engineer inside NVIDIA had been chasing the same goal: build a graphics chip that would change the industry. This wasn't just another product, it was proof that 3 engineers could challenge companies 100 times their size. Millions of dollars had already been spent, investors were waiting, employees were exhausted. There was only one thing left to do: ship it. In 1995, NVIDIA unveiled its first major graphics processor, the NV1. Inside the company, it felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. No one knew it was the beginning of their worst nightmare.
The NV1 wasn't a bad product. In fact, that was the problem. It was too different. Instead of following the graphic standards everyone else was beginning to adopt, NVIDIA tried to create its own path. The chip used a unique approach to rendering graphics. On paper, it looked innovative, maybe even brilliant. But technology doesn't succeed just because it's clever. It succeeds when other people choose to build around it. Game developers looked at the new architecture and hesitated. Supporting the NV1 meant extra work, extra time, extra cost. Most weren't interested. Then, the ground shifted beneath NVIDIA's feet. Microsoft introduced a new graphics standard called DirectX. It quickly became the language the gaming industry wanted to speak. The NV1 didn't speak it. Almost overnight, the product NVIDIA had spent years creating began looking like yesterday's technology, not because it couldn't work, but because the world had chosen a different direction. The launch was over. Now came the waiting for orders, waiting for reviews, waiting for proof that all those late nights had been worth it. Days passed, then weeks. The excitement inside NVIDIA slowly disappeared. Phones rang, but not with the calls everyone had hoped for. Sales were weak. Developers weren't embracing the platform. The industry had moved on. Imagine spending years building your dream, only to realize the market had already chosen someone else's. For a young company, there are few moments more terrifying, because a failed product doesn't just damage your reputation, it burns something far more valuable: time, money, trust, and NVIDIA was running out of all 3. Some meetings change a company forever. This was one of them. The conference room was unusually quiet. No small talk, no optimism. No one reached for the coffee. A projector hummed softly, casting rows of financial numbers across the wall. The finance team had spent all night checking them, again and again, hoping they had made a mistake. They hadn't. A single sheet of paper slid across the table. No charts, no colourful graphs, just numbers. Jensen picked it up. His eyes stopped on one line: cash remaining. Silence. Not because nobody had anything to say, but because everyone already understood. The room didn't need an explanation. The company had reached the point. Every founder hopes never comes. 30. That was the number. Not $30 million, not 30 customers, 30 days. Years later, Jensen Huang would recall that NVIDIA had roughly 30 days of cash left. 1 month. That's all that stood between the company and bankruptcy. Think about what that means. Hundreds of employees and still came to work every morning, believing they were building the future. Many had families, mortgages, children, dreams, and somewhere in the back of every executive's mind was a question nobody wanted to ask. Who do we tell first if we fail? That is the burden of leadership. Not making decisions when everything's going well, but making them when every option carries consequences. Most companies, when they reach this point, start preparing for the end. Layoffs, cost-cutting, selling whatever they can, trying to survive. 1 more week. Jensen Huang chose something else. He refused to let NVIDIA die slowly. If the company was going to fail, it would fail. Trying to win. Projects were cancelled. Engineering teams were reshuffled. Every remaining dollar, every remaining hour, every remaining engineer would focus on one product. One final opportunity. A graphics processor that had to succeed. There would be no backup plan, no second attempt, no miracle investor arriving at the last minute. only one chance to change the company's future. The building was quiet, but nobody was sleeping. Long after sunset, the lights inside NVIDIA were still burning. Empty coffee cups covered the desks, sleeping bags had become part of the office. Some engineers hadn't seen their families for days, not because anyone had ordered them to stay, because they understood what was at stake. Every hour mattered, every bug mattered, every mistake could be the one that ended everything. On one workbench sat a small circuit board. To the outside world, it looked ordinary. Inside NVIDIA, it carried the weight of an entire company. Its name was Riva 128. The first lesson had been painful. Innovation alone wasn't enough. This time, NVIDIA didn't try to force the industry just to follow its own rules. Instead, it built a graphics processor for the future everyone else was already moving toward. Compatible, fast, affordable, reliable. The engineers simplified the design, focused on performance, and made sure developers could actually use it. It wasn't about proving they were the smartest people in the room anymore. It was about solving the right problem. Sometimes your second idea succeeds because your first one taught you what not to build. Then, something unusual happened. The phone started ringing. Not from worried investors, from customers. Computer manufacturers wanted to know when they could get more chips. Retailers wanted additional shipments. Reviewers praised the performance. Developers finally had a graphics processor they wanted to support. Inside NVIDIA, people tried not to celebrate too early. They had learned how dangerous hope could be. But week after week, the orders kept growing. For the first time in months, the finance team wasn't asking, "How long can we survive?" They were asking, "How fast can we build?" The company that had been counting down its final days was suddenly running out of inventory. The Riva 128 didn't just save NVIDIA. It gave the company something even more valuable. Time. Time to hire. Time to improve. Time to dream again. Years later, people would look at NVIDIA and see an unstoppable technology giant. They wouldn't see the sleepless nights, the empty bank account, the boardroom where one number nearly ended everything. History remembers the victory. It often forgets how expensive survival can be. But Jensen Huang never forgot. Because once you've stood 30 days from losing everything, you lead differently, you think differently, you build differently, and perhaps that's exactly why NVIDIA didn't just recover, it became stronger than anyone imagined. Most companies, and after surviving a near bankruptcy, become careful, protect the cash, avoid unnecessary risks, stay alive. That would have been the safe decision. But NVIDIA had learned something different. Playing it safe had almost killed them. So instead of asking, "How do we protect what we've built?" Jensen Huang asked a different question. What will computers need 10 years from now? It wasn't a question many companies were asking, because the biggest opportunities almost never look obvious when they first appear. To everyone else, a graphics processor had one purpose: video games, nothing more. But inside NVIDIA, another idea was beginning to grow. What if these processors could solve problems far beyond graphics? Scientific research, weather prediction, medical discoveries, engineering simulations. Instead of drawing pixels, what if GPUs could process enormous amounts of data all at once? It sounded expensive, risky, maybe even unrealistic. After all, the company had only recently escaped disaster. Why take another gamble? Because Jensen Huang believed the biggest mistake a company can make is waiting until everyone else sees the opportunity. In 2006, NVIDIA introduced something that many people outside the technology world barely noticed. It wasn't a faster graphics card. It wasn't a flashy product launch. It was a software platform called CUDA. Instead of treating GPUs as hardware built only for games, CUDA allowed programmers to use them for thousands of other kinds of calculations. At first, adoption was slow. Many questioned the investment. Building an ecosystem around GPUs would take years. Money would be spent long before meaningful returns appeared. But NVIDIA had learned something during those terrifying 30 days. If you only build for today's market, you'll always be chasing someone else. Sometimes you have to build for a future that doesn't exist yet. For years, NVIDIA kept building new chips, new software, new ideas. Some succeeded immediately, others took years before the world understood why they mattered. Then, everything changed. Artificial intelligence exploded into the mainstream. Researchers needed more computing power. Companies raced to build larger AI models. Data centers expanded at a pace few had imagined. And hidden beneath it all were GPUs. Not because NVIDIA had predicted every detail of the AI revolution, but because it had spent decades preparing for a future most people couldn't yet see. The bet that once looked reckless suddenly looked visionary. People often ask, what made NVIDIA successful? Was it brilliant engineers? Yes. Was it timing? Partly. Was it luck? Every great company needs some, but none of those answers tell the whole story. The defining moment wasn't when NVIDIA became valuable. It wasn't when its stock price climbed. It wasn't when artificial intelligence became popular. It happened years earlier, inside a quiet boardroom, when there was enough cash for roughly 30 more days. 3 choices stood before them. Accept defeat, keep repeating the same mistakes, or risk everything on one final chance. They chose the gamble, and that single decision echoed across decades. History remembers winners. It celebrates billion-dollar valuations, record-breaking companies, and revolutionary technology. But history rarely remembers how close those stories came to ending before they truly began. NVIDIA didn't survive because it never failed. It survived because it learned faster than failure could destroy it. Because when the first plan collapsed, they built a better one. When the market rejected their vision, they adapted. And when they had only 30 days left, they refused to think like a company that was already dead. Perhaps that's the real lesson. The distance between failure and extraordinary success isn't always measured in money. Sometimes it's measured by one difficult decision. The difference between bankruptcy and a company that would help power the AI revolution was 30 days. 30 days, that's all NVIDIA had. 30 days between becoming another forgotten startup and becoming one of the most influential technology companies in history. The next time you hear about a trillion-dollar company, remember, there was once a moment when even its own survival wasn't guaranteed. If you enjoy stories about the business decisions that changed history, the companies that collapsed, the empires that nearly disappeared, and the impossible comebacks that rewrote the future, make sure you subscribe, because the next boardroom we step into might tell an even more unbelievable story. I'll see you in the next one.